Awesome. Everybody can see my screen? Awesome. So, welcome everyone to the Expat Life Cycle with Katheryn and Blink. I'm just gonna basically introduce Blink to you guys, hoping that some of you don't know what Blink is. Okay. So basically, Blink is a co-working space, and we are based in Tokyo. Recently, we opened another center in Asaka Mitsuke, which is in Kyoto. So we currently have two spaces now, one in Roppongi and one in Kyoto. Uh, like I said, we are a co-working space, but the base of Blink is like we believe in, bringing an idea, having an action plan in mind, and then combining both of them together to create something really cool. That's what our members and I mean, we have been doing for like last 2 years. Um, a little bit about Blink. This is our core idea. We believe in like creativity, connections, and collaborations, and we just bring everybody under the same roof and like just make cool stuff. So we've been doing a lot of events like this since last year. Most of it has been like hybrid or online thanks to COVID, but we did about 200 plus events last year, and we've been trying to do something similar this year. And these are the basic kind of events we do: tech programming, business entrepreneur, art creative, media communication, lifestyle culture, and Blink gathering. Well, this has not happened ever since COVID happened, but this is basically what we do at Blink. And this is our Facebook page. We are also on LinkedIn, Line, Instagram, everywhere. So if you guys want to connect with us, this is the easiest way to do that. So I'm just going to pause here for like 10 seconds. If you guys are not connected, you can just scan this QR code right now on your phone, and it'll take you straight away to our Facebook page. And if you guys are done doing that, give me a thumbs up or something. Okay. Perfect. And this is a small video, less than a minute. I'm just gonna play it. Just bear with me, guys. So yeah, that's our website. If you guys wanna, um, you know, visit us or like just check us out. And after the event is over, if you guys are interested in co-working or hosting such kinds of events, you know who to reach out to. I will anyhow send you guys a follow-up email after the event is over with the video link and also how to connect with us. So thank you so much. And I'm gonna let Katheryn take over now. So welcome, Katheryn. Thank you so much for doing this with us. And yeah, go for it.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here, and I love seeing, like, being reminded of the Blink community inside there, since it's been kind of a while since we've done in-person events. So let me go ahead and share my screen here. Okay. I think y'all are able to see that. I'm just going to pull up the chat as well here on my screen. Perfect. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the expat life cycle as well as culture shock in Japan. So let me just share a little bit about myself with you and kind of our overview and objectives. So again, my name is Katheryn Gronauer, and my company is called Thrive Tokyo. I'm a corporate trainer, and I'm also an executive or personal coach. So I help people primarily with transition to living and working in Japan. I'm half Japanese and half American. So I grew up living back and forth between Florida in the United States and Tokyo here. And a little fun fact is my family has been in many generations of the bathhouse business. So I grew up going to the local sentos almost every single day. And that was kind of a fun part of my upbringing. I'm also a wellness coach professional. So when I first started my business, I wanted to help people with health and wellness because I lost about 20 kilos when I came to Japan. But then I found out that a lot of foreigners don't know how to shop for groceries. And I also found out that people were really dealing with culture shock and trying to assimilate with being here in Japan. So my business essentially pivoted and I started to kind of expand to helping people more with orientation work and also with cross-cultural training at corporations. I also have a background in concierge services. So before I started my business, I worked for an international credit card concierge. So I was helping people with really unusual requests, by the way, like people will ask anything to a concierge. I've had people ask for sushi in Paris at 3 a.m. I've had people ask for how to arrange a helicopter this weekend from different locations within Tokyo for like a romantic getaway. So that was a really fun kind of job to try to really stretched my mind to thinking about what a good quality of lifestyle means to very different types of people. And also just kind of learn a lot about things that you can do within Tokyo and in Japan as well. Oh, let me click here. So in terms of Thrive Tokyo, so again, I basically help with two things. One would be onboarding programs for corporations who are looking to transition foreigners who are new here. So I would do a combination of cross-cultural support, orientation, and private coaching over the course of the time that they're here. Or I do just private transition and life coaching support for individuals. My company has been featured in different publications, including things like the Japan Times, Japan Today, and I also like to write for publications as well, like Women's Health, Mind, Body, Green, those kinds of publications, and just share information. Okay, so for today's objectives, we are going to be talking about a few things, and the primary thing is going to be about culture shock. So talking about how to identify culture shock either for yourself or for your peers who might be new to Japan. We're also going to talk about the challenges that foreigners face uniquely to Japan. So how is culture shock different here compared to other countries that you might go to? And I'm going to talk about those things in light of using the model called the Expat Life Cycle. So I'll be introducing that to you and helping you understand culture shock through each of these phases. So my first question for you is, how would you describe culture shock? And I'm going to go ahead and pop this link here into Mentimeter. We have kind of enough people where if you wanted to come off and just share your thoughts about culture shock, that's fine. But I think just for starters, if you want to go to this link and just input some of your ideas, how would you describe culture shock? What does culture shock mean to you? How do you know that you're experiencing culture shock? Okay, so we have some answers starting to come in here. When you live something that is completely different from what you are used to. Yes, so something about the pattern of your lifestyle is very different. That's interesting, though. I would dig a little further because some things that are different are really exciting. So where is the culture shock element coming from? We have another one, mental or psychological weariness, feeling like you're spending more energy and effort than usual to do things that aren't seemingly different to normal. Yes, so spending a lot of energy, I would say that's a very good way of describing it. So your use of energy tends to be different. Oh, you have to actively fight off a bad attitude. That's very interesting. I'd be keen to hear a little bit more from whoever submitted that. The realization that you lack the necessary cultural or societal knowledge to handle or fully understand a situation. So that's a really good point too. I think most people who are going to a new culture, they know that they're going to have an interesting experience and they're signed up for that. But a lot of people don't know what they don't know. So it's kind of like you're stumbling into situations where you realize that you were unprepared and you realize the extent of information that you weren't aware of. Okay, and we also have change in lifestyle, people, food, everything. So yeah, everything has changed and experiencing something really foreign and unique, being thrown off of your regular life. So yeah, so it's basically experiencing this massive lifestyle change in pretty much all elements of your life. So you're not just moving, but you know, the food you're eating, the people you're engaging with, the way work is done, like literally everything has been shifting. Okay, so I'm going to be asking you some more questions throughout the rest of this. So let's just go back here. And let me tell you about the expat life cycle. So this is the model called the expat life cycle. And as you can see, this curve here is essentially representing the level of happiness a person is experiencing over the course of time. And you can see in the early stages of a transition, this line is going up. But then we see a very big dip over the course of the transition, and then it sort of starts to kind of flatten out as time moves on. So my question for you, and I would love for you guys to come off of mute and share with me what your thoughts are. What do you think is happening around stage 1? What's happening at stage 1? How would you describe stage 1?
Can I say it if nobody else is?
Absolutely. I know you guys all have ideas because you've been engaging with the Mentimeter we just did. So sure.
I think stage 1 is when you initially come into a new country, in this case, Japan, and everything is new and awesome, you know, so you're like really happy experiencing everything, which is why I think the curve goes up. I mean,
Yeah,
I
so
feel
it's a very exciting time, right? Like you can kind of attribute this to how you would feel if you're a tourist. So anytime you go to a new country, it's all about all of the new and exciting and different things and trying to experience as much as you can and really taking enjoyment and excitement in what's different. So we essentially call this the honeymoon phase. So people go through a honeymoon phase when they move to a new country. What do you think is happening at number 2 here, where the line starts to curve down? What is happening here? I feel like this is a test for Alan. I know he's heard this one before.
I have to admit, I am trying very hard not to just jump in and
trying so hard not to say anything, Alan. Yeah.
If I talk around it, if phase 1 is sort of everything's foreign but in a fascinating way, in a way that, you know, entrances and enthralls you, then number 2 is everything is foreign but in a way that is alien and it's starting to exhaust you and you're starting to feel that sense of the shine is gone and everything's kind of, how do I figure this out?
Yeah, so you've used several different ways of describing it. So it could be like the shine, the initial shine of that honeymoon period has gone off, or another one is a flip. So all the things that were different, that were exciting, all of a sudden they're a struggle. So I have Dominique also put in the chat here as number 2 when culture shock sets in. Yes, so in terms of how this chart is organized, section 2 is essentially the culture shock phase. I would beg to differ that the entire chart you're seeing is culture shock from one stage to another. But this is where we really start to see people starting to experience signs of culture shock. And how I would describe it is also people go from being in the honeymoon phase where they're here and they're experiencing a culture, and then they realize that they're not going home. So they're like, wait a second, I'm actually living here now. I don't have a return ticket to go back to my home location. And also you start to want to develop a routine. So maybe you've gone from dining out all the time and going to all the tourist locations to thinking, okay, wait, maybe I need to have a community. I need to join a gym. I need to start to cook at home. But you start to come across obstacles. Maybe it's hard to find the kind of community or the gym that you're looking for, or maybe you don't know where to look for certain things, or you go to stores and you can't read anything. And so you don't really know how to do things. Maybe you don't know how to use all the functions in your home. I know one person mentioned that she couldn't figure out how to use her washing machine, and it was half filled with water, and the only way she could figure out how to start it again was just to open the door and have all the water gush out onto her floor and try to like mop it up and then restart it from the beginning. So just like really little tiny things where you feel like you can't be an adult, like you feel like you're trying to relearn how to essentially live your life within a new context. This is what starts to happen in phase 2. Okay, so what's happening at phase 3 then? So we had Rohit and we had Alan share, and we also had Dominique share in the chat. Anybody else wants to come off mute and share with us what's happening at phase 3?
Maybe homesickness starts to set in.
Yes, homesickness. Who was that, by the way? I can't see on my...
TJ.
TJ, thank you so much. So yeah, so this is essentially homesickness. This is when people realize, okay, you know, maybe I'm not cut out for this. This is a little too much. So we have kind of a combination of things are happening. One is just total information fatigue, the entire fatigue of moving to a culture, trying to figure out everything. It's just weighing you down energetically and mentally. It's just too much to kind of take on. There's homesickness that's setting in because you miss your friends and family and the comforts back home. But another thing that's happening is you might not have built up enough community, like outside of work, or maybe you don't have enough language skills under your belt as well to feel like you're able to communicate with people. So it's kind of like this, this experience where all of the things start to crash at the same time. You don't have the emotional support that you need to be carried through this type of point. And you're also just very fatigued from all the things that you've been going through. So as we move on, then we also have this phase 4. What do you think is happening after people tend to have that kind of crash? And by the way, when I say crash, it doesn't have to be a complete depressive state. Some people, it could be depression, but for others, it could just be a feeling of dullness, like, you know, all the shine has worn off and it's like, okay, what is the next exciting thing that I could do? You're like kind of craving that adrenaline rush. So what do you think is happening at number 4 then?
Maybe you're starting to build up those language skills and assimilate to some degree, and to make those easy, to do those easy things that you could do back home to some degree again.
Yes, absolutely. So I would say that people start to get used to the routine. It might not be the most ideal thing. Maybe they're not living their life to the fullest, but they have started to get used to the routine. Maybe they have started to make friends. But how I would describe it is that they're kind of living within the scope of their limitations, and they've come to accept the fact that they're going to be here for a while. So it's positive in the sense that they've kind of come out of this depressive state and they've accepted being here, but it's not necessarily so great and that they're really taking full advantage of the things that they could be doing to really make their experience really great. So we would call this essentially the acceptance phase. So we have honeymoon period, culture shock, then we have a state of kind of depression, and then we have this state of acceptance that happens. Okay, so I want to share with you a banana bread story because I want to share with you kind of how to describe what culture shock is happening, because culture shock, we usually think in our head is like a big moment of shock, but it's actually a lot of little tiny things that build up over time. So I had a client come to me once and she said, Katheryn, I want to work with you. I said, great. How can I help you? What do you need help with? She said, well, I really want to make banana bread. And I was very confused because I don't know how to bake that well. And I wasn't really sure what she meant by needing help in this area. And I found out that for her, baking is one of her favorite pastimes. It's something that brings her joy. It's kind of her happy place. And for the first year and a half that she had been in Japan, she hadn't baked at all. And she's the kind of person who likes to bake and bring items to her colleagues to share. She likes to bring them to her friend's place. And this is essentially something she just hasn't been able to do since being here. So I investigated further and I was like, okay, why are you having a problem with banana bread to the point where you want to engage me? And she said, well, okay, here's the thing. First of all, I don't really know where to find the flour that I'm looking for. So she doesn't know, they're specifically for baking flours. She's looking for certain types and she doesn't know where to go get them. She said, even if I knew where to get it, I don't know how to get to the store. I'm sure many of you who are used to living in Japan now are fine with public transportation, but there's a lot of people who come to Japan who, aside from just going to and from work, they're really scared to take public transportation. I've met quite a bit of people who have stuck to even taking taxis just to go anywhere to an event. Maybe you get really nervous about being late for something and you don't know how to read an address. So some people wind up just spending time at home because they don't want to spend money on taxis, but they're too scared to take public transportation. This tends to be a big thing for people. She also said, I don't know how to identify the flowers. If I know the store has it, I know how to get there. I actually can't read anything and I can't ask people for help. So I don't really know what I'm looking for. I also don't know if there's anything different about flour in Japan. I think it's the same, but is there something different about it that I have to use differently? Do I have to use a different amount? Do I have to adjust my recipe for it? And she said, even if she could do all that, she doesn't know how to operate her microwave oven. So this is kind of like just a very simple example of how a series of really little tiny things that you have to figure out can really build up over time. And in her case, she wasn't baking for an entire year and a half. And for many people, even though you're transitioning and learning new things, that's a really long time to go without feeling like you're able to engage in the things that matter the most to you. So if I was to explain culture shock in a nutshell here, we would say that it's basically a combination of feeling fatigued from too much information. Also a feeling of being unsettled, like you can't fully relax because you don't have those comforts that you're looking for. It's also a feeling of lacking self-sufficiency. I've met people who have said to me, this woman said she's in her 50s, but sometimes she feels like she's 7 years old. So you feel like a little kid again, like you're constantly dependent on other people and you can't accomplish a task on your own without needing a lot of support. So this kind of feeling of not being self-sufficient is another thing that pops up. We also have a feeling of lack of emotional support or connection. So again, there's kind of like, it takes time to make friends with people. So if people aren't making friends as soon as they arrive, then by the time they are feeling kind of down, they don't have that emotional support system. And we also have, finally, would be the inability to do things that you want to do. So I find a lot of people assume they can't do something in Japan when they actually can, but they just don't have the access or the resources to it. So there's this sense of not knowing what you don't know. That's another element that comes into play. So this kind of descriptions of culture shock, I would organize it into 3 different areas. The first would be knowledge. And I don't just mean knowledge like having knowledge or being able to research knowledge. I mean also getting access to information when you actually need it. Sometimes you might engage with a training that's too soon. Like you might get cross-cultural training or orientation when you arrive, but then you don't need any of the information until maybe 6 months have passed. So timely information, I would say, is a really big thing, along with, of course, the language can be another issue as well. The second category would be community. So having some type of support network for your emotional health. And the third is essentially a lack of purpose. And you see this a lot either with spouses who have no purpose for being in Japan other than just to come here with their family. Or you see this especially with professionals who feel like their ideas are not getting heard at work. So they're kind of like, okay, I came to Japan to help my company become more global and to have more outside, information and support, but I feel like my ideas are being put on deaf ears. Nobody's listening to me. What am I even doing here in my job and in my career? So that kind of comes up with purpose. And so all of these things are coupled with the realization that you're not going home. So kind of feeling trapped by that. It's like, okay, what is my out? I don't really know how to handle this. And I also don't really have an out. Okay, so my next question for all of you, and I'm going to go ahead and change the slide here. So you can use the same link. And for those of you who came in a little after, here's the link again. Share with us, how long do you think it takes to go from honeymoon phase to the depression phase? So if I'm going to go from phase 1 to phase 3, what is the timeline between that? Variable depends on the person and situation. So we have responses starting to come in. A very short time. Okay, I'm curious to know what short time would mean. I think it depends on the person, but 6 months sounds like a good average. Okay, so we have 6 months, we have it depends, we have a short time. Okay, I'll just go ahead and continue. So it seems like we have kind of different answers happening here. Oh, we have another one, 6 months to 1 year. So that's very different, right? Some people are saying a very short time. Some are saying maybe 6 months, some saying a year. Some says it totally depends. And all of these answers are correct. It totally depends on the individual. So I want to share with you kind of what are the factors that would come into play that would affect one person going through culture shock faster than another. So one would essentially be, wait, I want to see if I have it on the next slide. Okay. So one would essentially be, again, the purpose. So someone like a spouse, for example, who has no purpose for being in Japan other than just being with their family. I've met spouses who have already been into the depths of despair within 3 weeks of being here. So they've already set up their home and now they're just like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? Did this really happen? They spent so much time prepping to come to Japan and then all of a sudden they're like, oh no, what did I do? So I've seen it as short as 3 weeks, but I've also seen people who do have a purpose. So let's say a college student who is really excited about Japan. They love Japanese culture. They started studying the language before they came here. They might not experience this for maybe 2 years. So they spend the first couple of years, all of the excitement of engaging with things in Japan. They already have a network of friends at their school who they can instantly connect with and start going to activities with. So it's not really until they've been here for a couple years and there's not a lot of fun new things to do, or they might be thinking about their next career moves, where they start to feel like they're not really sure what they're doing here in the country. So again, it really depends. I find for professionals that this culture shock phase usually comes around 6 months. And that's kind of after, engaging with your company, realizing that it's taking a long time to make friends with your colleagues. And also, again, maybe you feel like there's processes and procedures that could be more efficient. And so you tried to change things and implement things in your company, but nobody's really listening to you. And then it kind of settles in where you're like, okay, well, what am I doing here? In this company, things are very different. I don't feel like I'm getting enough feedback from people. That's usually typically what settles in for people who are professionals. So I would say probably around 6 months is when that feeling of dullness starts to settle in. So let me share with you the elements of culture shock that are unique to Japan. So with the banana bread story, I've already told you something that could happen outside of your company. So just with your day-to-day living, like trying to relearn, I like to call it adulting. You're like relearning how to be an adult in Japan. But internally, when it happens for your company, I would say one of the primary things would be discomfort with relationship building due to Joel and gay relationships. So in Japan, because they have hierarchical types of relationship structures, and you also have a very close-knit or reciprocal relationship between manager and subordinate, this is something that is very difficult for people to assimilate to here in Japan. I've heard people say that they came to Japan and said, wow, everybody in Japan is so nice and polite. What a great country. I can't wait to work here. But then they start working and then everybody suddenly engages with them very differently. Maybe they're not nice and polite and inclusive. And it could be because of your role in your company. If you are someone who is a subordinate, people might be communicating with you very differently. And alternatively, if you're in a senior level position, you might feel like people underneath you are not being very transparent. They're being very vague. So the relationship you have with a person is going to directly affect the communication pattern that you're having with them. And I find that most people really struggle to assimilate because of this, because they feel like one person is vague, one person is not being inclusive, but then they go out and everybody's suddenly very polite outside of their office. So this is kind of a little confusing for people to assimilate to. Another thing I hear is I have trouble receiving feedback. So some people say that their colleagues had plenty of opportunity to share what had been wrong, but the person doesn't find out till much later that something had been wrong and they don't understand why people didn't say anything. You also hear people say that they're worried about offending people. So they hear that Japanese culture, people are so polite. So there's this tendency to feel like you can't relax because you're worried about accidentally doing something wrong or having a misstep or not understanding the etiquette. Another thing I hear a lot of complaints about is about meetings. So not knowing what your purpose is at a meeting, what you're supposed to be doing at a meeting. Maybe you try to give some ideas or feedback, but they're also not heard at the meeting. So meetings in Japan are also conducted differently. And this is something I feel brings a lot of anxiety to people as well. And the last one would be about expectations. So I find that most people who are global, they are very task focused, task and result focused. So as long as you feel like you're accomplishing your tasks and you're getting good results, you feel like you're doing well with your performance. But in Japan, there could be some alternative things that are valued, like maybe teamwork, showing loyalty or dedication to your company, maybe certain types of communication structures. So sometimes people go into a performance review and then they find out that what they thought they were doing was misaligned with what the manager was hoping that they would do. So this is kind of a mismatch as well. Okay, so questions would be, how can you flatten the curve? And I know some of you are participating, or maybe more, you've been in Japan for a while. So if you've been in Japan for a while and you are helping other people who are coming into Japan with culture shock, one thing you need to assume is that everybody is going to go through this type of up and down experience when they're transitioning. This is the case for anybody, no matter what culture you move to. So these phases do happen. It just depends on the individual of when they're going to happen. But if you can assume that they're going to be going through some type of culture shock over the first 6 months, you can essentially build your onboarding program to make sure that their needs are met over the course of that time. And sometimes that might actually look like dripping out your orientation and your cross-cultural training over the course of the 6 months, along with having follow-up sessions to check in with them. If you are in a company that only checks in with the person after they've moved into their home and say, hey, how's everything going? You know, how's it in Japan? They're still in the honeymoon phase. They're just going to say, yeah, everything's great. Everybody's, you know, so nice. I love my apartment, and that's it. But if you don't check in with them 6 months later, they could be really struggling and you might be missing that. So that's really important. If you are an individual and you are kind of going through this transition, some things that you can look into would be creating more social connections, especially ones that are outside of work. And I know this is really hard right now, especially during the COVID time, but anytime that you can look to develop more relationships, especially with communities, this is really essential, because sometimes you might meet people and develop a relationship with them, but they might wind up leaving the country. So if you can be part of organizations that are going to continue to be here beyond the individual's timeline of being in Japan, that's going to be really essential to your growth as well. Another thing is to keep in mind to have a positive outlook on the people you're interacting with. It's always better to go in and assume that people want to have a positive working relationship with you, because sometimes when you feel like you're experiencing culture shock and you didn't know what you were supposed to do, you could feel like you're misaligned with another person and that there's trying to create resistance with you, and that might not actually be the case. It could just be that you're both trying to figure out how to work well together. So I would say trying to give people the benefit of the doubt is going to be really essential. And stemming off of that, just having more of a curious mindset. So saying, okay, you know, I didn't know this, but what are the things that I can do to kind of alleviate the situation? And the last one I also really recommend is having reflection time. I think people are so focused on doing better, doing the next thing, having their goals, trying to move forward, that, you know, sometimes you just want to have a moment to sit with yourself and think, okay, this situation for culture shock was a bit awkward, but what does this mean for me? When I signed up to come to Japan and have a life-changing experience, you know, what were the things I thought they would be? What is the reality? And how is this an opportunity for growth right now? Because the challenging moments are the things that are going to stretch you and help you grow the most. So having an opportunity to reflect on them is really essential and going to be beneficial moving forward. Okay, so I'll just do a quick recap here. So culture shock, as we talked about, is basically an accumulation of information overload combined with lack of community and a lack of purpose. And those three things can make you feel energetically overwhelmed, fatigued, and feeling like you can't be self-sufficient. We also talked about the unique challenges that professionals experience in Japan in particular. And I shared with you the 4 phases of the expat life cycle. So we have honeymoon phase, we have culture shock phase, depressive state phase, and then we also have acceptance. So Rahit, I'm going to go ahead and pass the baton back to you. I have a few more things that I want to share with everybody about how you can engage with me upcoming. So I'll share that with you right after Rohit kind of catches those up.
Oh, that was amazing, Katheryn. I mean, I could relate to so many things. Thank you so much for that presentation. Okay, guys, so before we head on, we would like to do like 10 minutes of Q&A. I'm guessing you might have some questions, or if you guys just want to share your experience, or if you guys talk about something, because, you know, we are all on the same boat. So either you can just type it in into the chat option, or if you feel confident enough to talk, you can unmute yourself and, throw in your questions. Questions, experience, suggestions, anything.
Yes, I'm here. I'm here for you guys. Even if it's just a comment too. So, have you experienced each of these phases? Maybe what phase are you at right now? Or any other questions?
I have to say, I found your story about the lady who, deals with her laundry machine by opening it partway through to let all the water drain out, a little bit familiar, because I don't know that I would say I have too many difficulties with reading Japanese and sort of dealing with the Japanese language, but there are parts of how the Japanese do things that still occasionally swing me right back to sort of somewhere between 2 and 3. One example being, there's a button on my laundry machine that if you hold it down for a few seconds, it actually locks the lid. And it's the same system as what you've got to do to get the wash cycle to go for more than 30 minutes. And so there are days where I'm a little bit sleepy or I'm not paying attention to what I'm doing, and I'll accidentally hold the wrong button down for a few too many seconds. And when I come back to get my laundry out, I can't open the lid, and I'm standing there like an idiot staring at these buttons going, what have I done wrong? Why is this broken? And it's there in plain, simple, bright red Japanese saying, hold for 3 seconds to lock, and it'll take me 5 minutes of frustrated, what have I done to my washing machine? I just want to hang the washing up before I realize, oh shit, I've gone and locked the lid. And it's that idea that the laundry machine needs to be able to lock the lid that sends me back into this, why is this even a feature? Like, what purpose does this serve that it even needs to be a function on the machine? So I found her approach to just opening the machine and letting the water out to be quite an interesting workaround.
Yeah, so she was probably like, there's probably a function that would drain the water, but because I just can't figure it out, there's nobody who's going to come over and deal with this. Okay, last resort is just to open it. But I think what you said interesting about how just when you feel like you're fine, you can have a moment that takes you back into phase 2 or 3. So it's not like once you're in phase 4, you're kind of like free and clear. There could be some situations that come up where you just never know when you're going to have a moment where you feel kind of off, or like you're not able to figure something out on your own. And as you said, I do think it's interesting. Now I'm starting to wonder too why there's a lock function on that.
Yeah,
I can't imagine there's kids crawling up trying to open something, so I can't imagine that's why the feature is there, if anybody happens to know the answer.
I can't imagine why it's there either, but I've lived in a couple of places in Japan now, and I find that it's really this Japanese need for everything to be, completely unshin that always trips me up and sends me back to, somewhere between stage 2 and stage 3. There was, in the last place that I lived in, on Shikoku, I bought a new microwave electric oven thing that, it was wonderful and fantastic and did all the things, and even had a domed feature that made it whizzy and fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
But the issue with it was you couldn't run it for more than 20 minutes at a time. And it was some, to me at least, bizarre safety feature that it wouldn't actually let you even force it to stay hot at a certain temperature for more than 20 minutes at a time, even by resetting the cook cycle or whatever else. So all of these fantastic bake options and, deep roast options and make a pizza in your microwave options and all the rest of it, it's like, this isn't meant to be used quite that way because it's only designed to be on for a maximum of 20 minutes at any meaningful temperature. And it's like, a lot of the features that I ended up buying this thing for, I never ended up using because it was such a hassle to get anything done, because you'd get to 20 minutes and it would just turn itself off. And it didn't matter what you did, you had to wait for its internal timer to dial down and wait for the system to go, yep, it's a safe temperature now, you can continue using it how you were before. And it was like, now I just use it as microwave because that's the
Yeah.
only thing it's really useful for now.
You know, I think you reminded me that sometimes Japanese people also don't recognize what foreigners in Japan might think is unusual. So, I think Dominique, I saw you had your hand raised. So for example, let's just say trash separation. You know, Japanese people might know, okay, taking off your shoes is unusual to being in Japan. Using business card exchange, that's unique to being in Japan. There's certain things that people know that are customs that are unique to being in Japan, but something like separating trash, they might not recognize that as being Japanese. So I think it's also hard if they can't understand what might be different or unusual, they don't know when to help you. And if they see you doing something wrong, like not separating trash properly, they might just assume, okay, this person is just, not doing things the right way, but not necessarily recognizing that it could be unique to being in Japan. So yeah, I think that's a good point about how a lot of the processes or procedures are based off of Japanese mentalities, and you have to understand the mentality to understand the different functions.
It's actually, I don't want to sort of detract from other people talking, but it is very interesting to me that you phrase it like that, because I was part of the JET program before I moved to Tokyo for a bunch of different things. And one of the things that I encountered in the JET program was this idea that I've personally found to be fairly accurate. Once a foreigner can speak Japanese well enough, the Japanese expect you to be Japanese. And so they don't seem to realize that just because you can ask the question or just because you can talk to them doesn't mean you understand everything that's happening. And sometimes it's not that you don't know how to read the thing, or you don't know how to work out the instructions or whatever. It's more a sense of befuddlement or confusion as to, why is this necessary? Why does it have to be done this way? Why, like, what am I doing wrong that isn't written down or isn't being sort of expressed to me in some fashion? And sometimes they really are just like, oh, you can speak Japanese, that means you're a Japanese person, up until you're not.
Yeah, you must know everything, right?
Yeah, and it's like, they expect you to just have all of this, Ishin Denshin type knowledge that they take for granted and assume comes with being able to do things in Japanese. And it's quite interesting that you phrased it that way.
Yeah, I think so. So I think there's, I do think that most Japanese people who I come across are very willing to help when they know what needs to be helped with. But sometimes there could be cases they don't realize the extent to what might be a shock here. So I know, Dominique, did you have a question?
Yes. So my question is for you, Katheryn. Whenever I go back home, whether it's, a week or 3 weeks, I always find that the reverse culture shock I experience at home seems to really throw me back into a bit of a culture shock loop when I come back to Japan. So I was wondering how you dealt with that, either number one, if you've experienced something similar, if you have, how you've dealt with that, and any advice for navigating this kind of bicultural landscape.
That's really an interesting topic. I was talking to another woman who also does transition coaching, and she was talking about repatriation. So I personally don't usually help people with repatriation in general, but I'm sure many of you have also experienced similar things where you just go for a quick vacation and it's very off. And there's little things for me that I experience, at least within the first week of being back in the States. And, I think first and foremost, I'm bowing at everybody. I'm sure maybe some of you have done that as well. Another thing would be here in Japan, if I'm paying by cash, I usually like to round up when I'm paying so that I can get back, a 1,000 yen bill or a 500 yen coin instead of small change. And whenever I do that in the States, I usually get pushback. Someone says, why are you overpaying? I'm like, oh, I want $1. I don't want a penny, or, whatever, little things like that. So there's just kind of little tiny habits that I would say that you definitely notice and pick up on when you go back and visit home. I think that one of the things I've talked about with people who have repatriated is that they realize that they need to start engaging with different kinds of people, because usually being in an international community is where you find a little bit more of comfort when you're re-engaging with life back in your hometown, because you find that the people who you're with kind of have a limited knowledge. So you need to be able to connect with people who have also had some type of international experience or cross-cultural experience to feel kind of comfortable there. So I don't have any specific advice in terms of dealing with reverse culture shock, at least from being on vacation and that type of standpoint. But if you ever did repatriate, I would say trying to find people in an international community, I think would be where you would find a little bit more comfort.
Thank you, Katheryn. Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. Thank you.
Great, thanks for your question. I know I see some people are putting notes in the chat as well, but I want to let you guys have opportunities to come off mute. Or Rohit, just let me know how we're doing with time. I can share some other information too.
Yeah, we have time. I think someone asked another question on the chat.
Yeah.
I think it was Kayo. Do you have any tips on how to make a meeting with Japanese people go well?
I have a lot of tips, and I can literally do like a 2.5-hour training just on communication tips and meetings. I would say if I was to give kind of some, one-off tips, one would be maybe to share just a general agenda beforehand. So people know if they need to bring any questions or comments, or they know what their role or purpose is when they're coming to a meeting. Another would be if you're looking to generate feedback, I would recommend having small group discussions so that people don't feel like they have to volunteer opinions in a large group setting. If they can have opportunity to collaborate in smaller groups and then have the group share as a team, that's usually a good way of generating and doing brainstorming sessions with large groups. Third tip would be, I had a third tip. It's kind of slipping my mind right now. So yeah, just essentially having some type of agenda so people know what is going to happen, some type of group oriented settings so that people can generate more discussions. And then essentially, instead of singling people out, you can pick or have teams be selected in generating feedback. Those would be my top tips.
Great, thank you so much.
Perfect. Okay, so Rohit, should I go ahead and just share some next things? Okay, so I know we're coming up on time here. I want to let you guys know I'm actually doing a webinar on Monday at 12 o'clock. So